Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for session 2 of Tap In 2020, Sustainable Education and Balancing the New Norm. It looks like everyone's starting to roll in, so I will allow a couple minutes for everybody to log on. My name is Ricky Clark, once again, and I'm actually reporting live from our Pure Water Project, Las Virginis Triumphal demonstration facility. So since I am on site and we do have other people around, I do have my mask on to make sure that I'm adhering to social distancing and COVID guidelines. So I hope you all can hear me clearly. Just a reminder, we do have the Q&A and chat boxes live. So if you have any questions throughout the course of this session or comments, or you just kind of want to interact with each other, you can do so either in the chat, or if you have questions for our keynote speaker, Ms. Leahy or myself, you can put that in the Q&A. All right, and for those of you that are just joining us, I'm just going to allow a couple minutes for people to log on. I know it takes some time to get everyone on here, and I don't want anyone to miss what we have going on today. So if you can just give us a couple minutes, and then we'll get started. I'm going to share my screen. All right, and we will get started in about 2 minutes here. All right, looks like we have a question. One second. Looks like we have a question from Maureen Berry. No, since we are in webinar mode, participants will only be able to see the host, myself, and then our panelists. So you won't be able to see everyone this time since we're in webinar mode and not meeting mode. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Once again, my name is Ricky Clark. I am the Public Affairs Associate here, or one of 2 Public Affairs Associates here at Las Virginis Municipal Water District. And welcome to session 2 of this year's version of Tap In, Sustainable Education and Balancing the New Norm. For those of you that were here last week, welcome back. For those of you that weren't able to make it, welcome. If you would like to watch last week's session, you'll be able to. We'll be posting a recording of it, so you'll be able to see what we went over last time. But basically this week, we're just continuing the conversation of sustainable education and sort of the role that we as a water district play within that. Last week, we started the conversation with a panel discussing the current landscape of education and how it's evolving both during COVID and beyond. And so a large part of that discussion basically went over how sustainability is going to be worked into education and curriculum and stuff like that more and more as time goes by, and really as the issue becomes more urgent, right? We're dealing with climate change, we're dealing with water security issues, and all types of things of that sort. So we really wanted to start the discussion, and today we'll be continuing that. In a little bit here, I'll be giving a tour of our Las Virginis Triumphal Pure Water Demonstration Facility, and you guys will all be getting an up-close look at how we're doing what we can to make sure that we're meeting those challenges that we'll be facing in the future, and essentially creating our own localized source of water so that we don't really have to, so much rely on water coming from the State Water Project from Northern California. That way, we're basically setting ourselves up for a successful future and making sure that our region will always have a reliable water supply available. But before that, we have a very special guest speaker, Jessica Leahy. She will be delivering our keynote. She's an educator as well as a New York Times bestselling author of her book, The Gift of Failure, and how the best parents learn to let go so their children can succeed. She's basically going to be talking about teaching and raising resilient children, which is a very pertinent and very important topic, especially as we're all getting used to the challenges faced by COVID. So I'll be talking plenty later on. I want to go ahead and switch the controls over to Jessica, and she will be delivering our keynote.
Hello, hello. I hope everyone can hear me. I hope everyone is settled in and comfortable and has a little bit of water or coffee to drink. I've got mine right here, so I'm all good. Welcome to today. I'm coming to you from Vermont. I have to say, I've spent a fair amount of time in your area, and I've been able to bring my kids with me when I go out there to speak. And, you know, I was talking to my kid today about the fact that I was going to get to speak here, and he said, "Oh man, I wish we could be going in person." And I absolutely get it. We're just dying to be out there, and you live in such a beautiful part of the country. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what we're going through right now in terms of COVID, how that affects education, how that affects parents. And, you know, as someone who's sort of out there doing a lot of speaking about education and parenting, I'm so grateful I get to speak at this sort of intersection of parenting and education, how the way we parent. And right now, actually, for a lot of parents, the way parents are educating their kids, because a lot of kids, including mine, part of the time is home. There are a lot of opportunities that are available to us as parents in education, but we're so overwhelmed right now. I'm so overwhelmed right now. I haven't taken chemistry since I was in high school, and I'm 50 years old, and I am overwhelmed trying to help my 17-year-old with chemistry. It's just a really complicated time right now. As a teacher, you know, there's so much in education changes, but if we can focus on the things that sort of stay the same, the things that are sustainable in education and the things that are sustainable in how kids learn, and continue to focus on those. And I think that'll help us give ourselves and our kids and our kids' teachers a bit of a break so that we can focus on what's really important. I have been a teacher for over 20 years. I've taught every grade from 6 to 12, and I have to say my heart really does lie in middle school. I'm just a huge fan. I love middle school. I love it with all my heart. I love middle school kids. And part of the reason that I love middle school kids is that if you look at the way kids' brains develop, we We used to think actually that kids' brains were done developing when they were 10, because a 10-year-old's brain is about the size of an adult brain. And if any of you out there have ever met a 10-year-old, you're probably quite familiar with the fact that 10-year-old brains are not fully cooked. And there's a lot of things that are not fully cooked about kids' brains. Their synapses are still forming, their nerves are still myelinating, which means they're getting this wonderful insulating sheath around them so that the messages in the brain can go as fast as possible and be as efficient as possible. The biggest issue, though, is that this frontal lobe, the front part of the brain, it's not online yet. It's not really hooked up to the rest of the brain yet. So the younger the kid is, the more they're dealing sort of on the emotional parts of the brain, the deeper parts of the brain, the lower parts of the brain, and our brain develops up and forward. And so the older a kid is, the more likely they are to have some facilities in their frontal lobe. And their frontal lobe is all about, it's all about the adulting. It's all about the time management and switching from one task to another, and knowing how to plan your time and your projects and having impulse control. All of these things happen in the frontal lobe, and it's just not there yet. So especially in middle school, when suddenly we thrust kids into a situation where they have lockers and they have to change classes and they've got all these textbooks and all these things. And by the way, all of a sudden there's social lives and hormones and all this other stuff. It's just a lot to juggle. But even moving into high school and even beyond, our kids' frontal lobes are not fully developed yet. They're actually not fully developed, and we're not fully hooked up to our frontal lobes until our mid-20s. So as far as education goes, that has a lot of implications for how we as parents sort of handle our parenting and teaching our kids. But the fun thing about kids not being fully sort of wired for sound when they're in their middle school and high school, especially, and when we're giving them so much extra to deal with, is the fact that my job as a teacher and our jobs as parents are to sort of watch our kids, watch them screw up all over the place, especially in situations like I mentioned in middle school, where we give them more than they can handle. And we just sort of watch them screw up, and we don't intervene in every single moment that they're doing something wrong. We wait for these incredible learning opportunities when they've had a snack and they're not upset and the emotions are kind of on an even keel. And as a teacher, I wait for those moments to happen. And when they finally happen and everybody's ready, here's what was happening far too often in my middle school and high school experience, is that at that moment when everyone was fully ready for this wonderful learning opportunity, the parents would come into the school and they'd say, here's the forgotten homework, and here's the forgotten soccer cleats, and aren't I wonderful, and don't you love me, sweetie? And see, teachers, I'm doing my parenting thing. And the problem with that is that these learning opportunities are then just gone. They don't come up very often. They're hard to create. And so from a teacher's perspective, I was getting really irritated. And don't worry, I'm going to explain myself. I'm not a horrible person. I was getting really irritated with the parents of my students for robbing the kids and me of these incredible learning opportunities. So full disclosure, like I said, I was irritated. I was angry, dare I say. And the problem is that when parents and schools work together, we know for sure, we know from research that when parents and schools and kids are all working together, that's where the best learning happens. So the minute there's any kind of adversarial or tension between all of us, it's just not working very well. So here's the problem, though. As angry as I wanted to be with the parents of my students for this sort of over-parenting thing, I couldn't be, because I was doing it to my own kids. I was parenting them into a state of helplessness. I was robbing them from learning opportunities. I was as culpable as everyone else was. And so I ended up writing The Gift of Failure, mainly because I wanted to understand how the way we parent and the way we teach actually lends itself, how it affects kids' ability to learn, and how it affects their resilience, and how it affects their motivation. And there's all kinds of research out there, and I want to make sure that I stick with the things that I think will be most helpful right now and give parents a sense the sense of control that I think has been lacking. One of the things that's been most stressful about this situation is the lack of control we have over where we can go and how we can do it. And our kids feel a distinct lack of control. I think that element is really, really important because lack of control can lead to accelerated learned helplessness, because when we don't feel like we have control, when we feel like we're suffering from that lack of control, when we feel like we don't have this thing called self-efficacy, when we feel like our actions aren't going to lead to any kind of real change, and we can't fix what's wrong with the world around us or our immediate sphere, we tend to go helpless. The good news is, if you look at the data, if you look at the research on learned helplessness, especially when you look at the big sort of roundups of data, the metadata on learned helplessness, you see that if we want to reduce learned helplessness, the way we do that is by giving back some control. So I'm going to try to help give you some control back today, and then help you give your kids some control back so that they can feel less helpless. Okay. The gift of failure, here are the basic strokes of the gift of failure, the broad strokes of the gift of failure. And what we know from a lot of data, from about 45 years of really reliable data, because we've done sort of studies of the studies to see that that data is reliable, we know that extrinsic motivators that come from outside of us, like grades, unfortunately, paying kids for grades, loving our kids more when they get high grades and less when they get low grades. And believe me, I have said never in a million years would I do this, but I'll explain how we all kind of do it without meaning to do it. Not all of us, but many of us do it without meaning to do it. All of those extrinsic motivators, and that includes things like surveillance, watching our kids on their phones and looking on the grading portal all the time to see what their grades are, what every single point is. And I'm not saying we can't use these things, but those modes of surveillance, plus giving kids rewards in exchange for their performance, loving them more in exchange for performance, the grades themselves and the trophies and the points and the scores and the honors, all of those things are extrinsic motivators. And what we know about extrinsic motivators is that they do not help with long-term motivation. In fact, what we know about them is that they actually undermine long-term motivation to get our kids to do what we want them to do, which ultimately should be to learn, to become more resilient, to become better athletes, to become better musicians, to become better thinkers. So here's the problem. As a teacher and as a parent, but as a teacher, I'm stuck with, for the most part, with grades and points and scores. There are alternatives, and I may be able to get into that towards the end of this. But as a parent, I was doing it too. I was holding the favorite stuffed animal for ransom until the kid was doing what I wanted them to do. I was using sticker charts to get my kids to load the dishwasher or do the laundry or whatever that thing was. And if those things don't work over the long term, then I'm in big trouble. So what do we use? And by the way, sticker charts, no, they don't work. They work very briefly in the short term. All extrinsic motivators are great in the short term. They work really well. They trick us. They can work really well to boost motivation, by the way, and they can work really well as like a one-off. If you just want to get some initial burst of motivation to get a kid to do something, they'll work great. But if you keep them up as a sustained practice by that carrot and stick of the sticker or the money or the grades or whatever, then you're actually going to, over the long term, undermine your kid's motivation. And in gift of failure, I say it really plainly, actually. If you would like your children to not want to learn math, pay them for their math grades, or really give them grades, which is a major problem in education at the moment. Fortunately, that's changing. What we want, though, is intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is the thing that does not change. How we evaluate kids may change. How we parent may change. How we give kids rewards for things may change. But intrinsic motivation isn't something that is going away. It's sort of hardwired into us. And if you look at it at its highest level, like Leahy, Csikszentmihalyi's flow, that flow state is this place where we're doing something that is just the right level of difficulty. It's not too hard and it's not too easy. And suddenly you realize that like time and space has fallen away and you've been doing this thing for hours and you don't even know where the time has gone. That's a flow state. And the cool thing about flow state is it's where the deepest learning happens. So how do we get that? How we reliably boost intrinsic motivation, which is where kids are in it for the sake of the learning, where kids are getting hopefully to that flow state where the deepest learning is happening. The way we get that is through three things. These three things are, and believe me, this is not me. This is the research of Edward Deci. By the way, there's a bibliography, if it hasn't been already made available to you. If you go to jessicalahey.com, under speaking, the menu item speaking, there's a big button that says download speaking bibliography, and it'll come to your computer as a PDF, and it will have links to every single thing I'm telling you about. Every book, every article, every YouTube video, every single thing I mention is on this bibliography, so you don't have to write anything down. You can just listen. Edward Deci looked at what are the ideal ways to create intrinsic motivation. And the way we create intrinsic motivation, the way we hopefully get it started, is through giving anyone, but we're talking about kids today, more autonomy, which is kind of like independence, but it has really more to do with control. Number 2, competence, which unfortunately for us parents is not the same thing as confidence. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Number 3, connection. When I get the chance to go to schools and do professional development, or even go virtually to schools and go do professional development, which I love, that connection piece could go on for 2 hours, because connection really is the secret sauce of teaching. It can take, we can talk about it for the longest time, because it's not just about interpersonal connections. It's about helping kids see learning as relevant, helping kids figure out how this learning is relevant outside of class. And that's where I also want to talk about the sustainability stuff and how we get kids interested in things like water sustainability, because the only way we're going to get kids interested in that is making a connection between them and the material. And I'll get to that at the end. But let's start with autonomy. So autonomy is really about giving kids some choice in their decisions, giving kids the ability to make their own decisions, giving kids the ability to have some control over the way they do things, when they do things, how they do things. And it can really be quite simple. It can be as simple as, "Hi, sweetie, so it's cold outside today." You don't say, "Would you like to wear a hat?" What you say is, "Would you like to wear the red hat or the blue hat?" And the kid, especially little kids, are like, "Oh, wow, I have a choice." And you're going to be a lot more likely to get their buy-in to that choice. That's giving them a little bit of autonomy. When I talk about this autonomy stuff, often people will say, "Oh, well, that's just laissez-faire parenting and there's no rules and kids are running all over the place doing stuff." That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the ability to, the way we parent, giving kids some choice within our expectations and the consequences that we set for them. And here's why it's important. So there's a researcher named Wendy Grolnick. Her books are on the bibliography I mentioned. She does this really cool research into how different kinds of parenting, autonomy supportive versus directive. She also uses the word controlling, but I'm not going to use that word, because that word controlling it doesn't go down very well. It's not a very nice word. So I'm going to go with directive. Autonomy supportive versus directive parenting. How does that affect kids' motivation, kids' ability to learn? So she did this cool experiment where she had parent-child pairs come to her lab. She gave the kids a task that was difficult for them. I mean, she wanted it to be something that was probably going to lead to a little bit of frustration. She also gave the parents instructions that were vague on purpose, because she wanted to see how the parents would interpret those directions. She said to the parents, "Be there with your child while they complete this task." And then they left the parent and the child alone in a room with one-way glass, and they watched the parent and the child. They watched their interactions. They watched how the kid behaved, how the adult behaved, and they coded that behavior. So what they found was this. Some parents are there and really support their kid in doing the task that they've been asked to do. They are there for them. They don't leave them alone. They don't abandon them. But if the kid gets stuck, they don't jump in right away. They aren't really quick to sort of suddenly take over and do the task for the kid or tell the kid what to do next. They support them in being frustrated and help redirect them. That redirection is really important because that's what I do a lot in teaching. You know, if I were the kind of teacher where when a kid raises his hand and says, Mrs. Leahy, I'm stuck, and I run right over there and I answer the question for the kid, I'm a terrible teacher. The kid doesn't really learn very much. My job is to stand there to help them think about it a different way, to show them maybe they should read the instructions again, be a sounding board for their frustrations, because I'll tell you a secret, very often the kids figure it out for themselves. They just hadn't sort of taken a breath and thought about it. So those are autonomy supportive parents. And then there are the directive parents, and the directive parents are just there with the instruction. The minute the kid has an issue, the minute the kid is confused, the minute the kid gets frustrated, the parent is right there with the next thing, which is tends to be fairly instinctual. I mean, I hate seeing my kids frustrated. I hate seeing my students frustrated. I don't want them to think they're stupid. And often what happens is our kids get frustrated and they're like, well, forget it. I can't do it. This is too hard. This is too hard. I can't do it. And that tendency to jump in and just give the next thing, to tell what to do next, that's called directive. When she invited the parents and the children back to her lab for a second day, she did something sneaky. This time she gave the kids a task that was, again, a little bit frustrating, but this time she separated the kids and the parents so that she could watch to see how the kids deal with a task that's slightly frustrating when their parents are not a part of the process anymore, when they're not there to hand them the answers. What is really interesting to me is that the kids of the autonomy supportive parents, they got excited about the task and got engaged in the task. And yes, they got frustrated because that's how the task was set up. That's how the whole thing was set up. But when they got frustrated, they were able to sort of, okay, take a breath, think about the instructions again, close their eyes and breathe, you know, whatever it is that they need to do to sort of recenter, redirect themselves, they were able to do that. And almost all of them completed the task. The children of the directive parents were a different story, though. When they watched those kids, what happened was the kids got excited about the task and engaged in the task, but when they got frustrated, they gave up. They just gave up. A lot of them cried, got frustrated, gave up. And while there's nothing wrong with the crying and getting frustrated, what is a problem for learning anyway, is that tendency to give up. Because here's the thing. When those kids come to school or are trying to learn anything, it's the kids who can push through and feel that frustration and sort of have some faith in themselves that they can deal with it, that are going to learn the best, have the best capacity to learn. Because we did autonomy, now we're on competence, because competence is not the same thing as confidence. Confidence is sort of this empty hope, this optimistic hope. And believe me, I'm a big fan of optimism. I am a huge optimist, but my optimism is based on, hopefully, on some experience, some knowledge that I've done this a couple different ways. And if you suddenly came to me and today and said, oh, hold on a second, we want you to talk about a completely different topic. We changed our minds. Can you do it? And I'll say, well, you know, I've been speaking for about 6 years and I've done it a whole bunch of different ways. I'm sure I can figure it out. That's competence. That's confidence based on actual experience, as opposed to confidence based on, oh, my parents have told me I'm super smart, so I should be able to do this. That's easily burst. And by the way, it's not the best way to build self-esteem, which I'll get to in just a second. Competence is durable, and competence is what sees our kids through when something gets frustrating. And the reason this is really important is there's another book on the bibliography that I highly encourage you to take a look at, called Make It Stick. It's by 3 authors. It's from Harvard University Press. And there are 2 major points in this book that I love. One has to do with formative assessments, which is a way that schools are changing right now to assess kids in a way that actually helps with learning. Whereas the way most of us, I'm assuming there are a bunch of adults watching this, the way I was assessed when I was in school was, like in chemistry, you'd be on unit 1 and the teacher would teach. And then there'd be like a big test, 80% of your grade, no backsies, no redos, 80% of your grade. That's called a summative or formative assessment, and it's not very good for learning. It's pretty good at like getting a snapshot of where someone is in a moment, but it's not great for learning. Whereas formative assessment, which is a lot of low stakes assessments along the way, that's great for learning. So that book does that really well. But what I want to talk about is something else the book does really well, explains really well, which is desirable difficulties. And desirable difficulties are explained so beautifully in this book. And essentially, very briefly, desirable difficulties are when we give our kids something that's a little bit more difficult to parse. If we give our kids a task that is just a little bit more difficult to figure out going in, if we give them fewer directions, if we put it at just beyond their ability level rather than safely within that box, safely within the parameters of their ability level, our brains do something slightly different than if a task is really easy or if it's something that we just need to cram into our brains for a short period of time. Our brains do this process called encoding, which is to put the knowledge into long-term memory, to encode the knowledge into long-term memory as opposed to into short-term memory, which is, where we stick like that number, the 7 digits for the pizza guy delivery so that we can know it for the span of time it takes to dial the phone, and then we can promptly forget it. Desirable difficulties are pretty cool because what they do is they allow us to know something more durably, know something more thoroughly in the short term, and understand it more durably for the long term. So if you were to take a quiz tomorrow after sort of learning something that's been a little bit more difficult to learn, and I've sort of helped you, supported you, but let you sort of struggle with it a little bit, you'll know it more deeply in the short term. And if you come back in a couple of weeks and I quiz you again, you'll probably remember it better than someone who was just fed the information and asked to memorize it and regurgitate it. So desirable difficulties, let's think for a second about who can benefit from desirable difficulties. The students in my classroom that benefit from desirable difficulties the most are kids who can have a little bit of faith in their competence, be frustrated, and not give up. Kids who give up really easily aren't as likely, as we just talked about. Kids who have been parented more by directive and taught more by directive teachers are more likely to give up and will be a lot less likely to see the desirable difficulty through to the end. So if I have 2 kids come to my classroom door and one is a kid who's super bright, super brilliant, but can't be frustrated, like just gives up the minute they get frustrated, and just a perfectly wonderfully average kid, but who can get frustrated and who can sit with that for a minute and push through to the end, I'd rather teach the super perfectly average kid 20 times over, because that kid is going to be more teachable. That kid is going to learn more deeply and more durably, and they just have more potential in terms of how they learn. And there's a wonderful question that's come in through the Q&A about how we help kids become more autonomous. And I'll be sure to circle back to that. Just we've left autonomy for the moment, but I'll make sure we come back to it. So the other thing I want to get into when we talk about competence is the work of Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. And her book, her brilliant book, is called Mindset. And I'm going to ask you that if you have only read articles about Carol Dweck's mindset, I would beg you to read the book as well. It's actually a really fascinating book. It changed the way I think about my own learning. It certainly changed the way I think about my teaching and my own kids. Because if you've only read articles about Carol Dweck's mindset, what you probably think the message of the book is never praise your kids for being smart and only praise them for their effort, which is stupid. Of course, that's not the message of the book. It's been oversimplified in the media, though, so you might think that's the message of the book. Poor Carol Dweck has had to go in and write whole articles about how that's not what her book is about, because it's been oversimplified by the media. And by the media, I implicate myself in that. Education reporters, we're part of the media, and often it comes down to we have 500 words to write an article and not 2,000, and mindset deserves 2,000, not 500. So Carol Dweck's mindset is cool because what she talks about is this thing called a fixed and a growth mindset. And essentially what this comes down to is this. Carol Dweck ran a bunch of experiments where basically she found out that if she gave kids feedback that amounted to, oh, you got an 8 out of 10 on this quiz, you must be so smart. Or, oh, you got an 8 out of 10 on this quiz, you must have worked so hard. That when she gave a subsequent quiz that was harder, that was more challenging, the kids who were praised for being so smart got the same grade or maybe a little bit lower, which is to be expected. It was a harder quiz. But the kids who were praised for how hard they worked got the same grade or a little bit higher, which is interesting. But for me, what I'm really fascinated by is the next part of this, which is that when she asked the kids, if you liked what was on that quiz, how would you like some challenge problems, some even more challenging problems than the ones that were on the quiz? Who wants them? Turns out the kids who have been told how smart they are in the feedback don't want the challenge problems. They are like, no way, no how, don't want anything to do, with the challenge problems. Whereas the kids who were praised for how hard they worked wanted the challenge problems. Now, when I talk to even little kids, I think the youngest I've asked about this is like kids around 10. Why do you think that the kids who have been told that they're smart don't want the challenge problems, but the kids who have been praised for how hard they worked wanted them? They get it every time. And I'll tell you what their answer is in just a second, because the other interesting part of this is that after she asked them about the challenge problems in another experiment, she said, okay, I'm going to be giving this quiz to other kids. So what I would love is if you would take this piece of paper and you would write down what it was like taking the quiz. Oh, and you know what? Could you also write down your score? I think that would be really helpful for the kids, the other kids. The kids who were praised for how hard they worked did exactly what she asked. They wrote down their score and they wrote down their experience of taking the quiz, what it was like for them. The kids who were praised for how smart they are, they wrote down their experience of taking the quiz, what it was like for them, but almost 50% of them lied about their score. They artificially inflated their score. And again, when I ask little kids about that, they are right on with their answer, which is this. Of course, we're going to lie about our score. And of course, we're not going to take the challenge problems if you tell us we're smart, because if you tell us we're smart and we take challenge problems, problems that we're more likely to get wrong, you're not going to think we're smart anymore. And that big smart stamp that we've been stuck on our forehead, that gifted and talented, that I'm so smart, that genius thing that has been stuck on our head ever since my mom gave me, took me to get that IQ test when I was 6. And then she told me my score. Just don't do that, by the way. There's a book on the bibliography called Ungifted by a guy named, a wonderful thinker, wonderful scientist named Scott Barry Kaufman. In that book, he talks a lot about the problems with the IQ test, which are many. But what happens when you set a kid up to believe that that number, that IQ test number, is like what they've got until from the day they're born to the day they die, and that's it. Thank you. End of story. That's not how IQ works. Even if it did work in the first place, it's certainly not how intelligence works. Kids who believe that that smart sticker on their forehead is a binary thing. It's a either I am or I'm not. When they're given challenge problems, when I give them something extra in class, something extra hard to sort of stretch them a little bit, those kids are going to be less likely to take those opportunities because they're so afraid of being found out for possibly not being as smart as we think they are, or having them think themselves that they're not as smart as they thought they were. Whereas kids who are praised for their effort, various shades of being praised for their effort, and I'll talk about what that looks like, those kids are going to be more likely to take the challenge problems, because part of what they are beginning to understand is that intelligence is malleable. It is not something that we're born with this horsepower and we die with this horsepower. It is something that changes the more we take challenges that are a little bit uncomfortable for us, that we have to stretch for, that are, to an area that we don't exercise very often. Like if I were to suddenly pick up a new musical instrument or a new language, I would be making all kinds of new connections in my brain, and I would increase my capacity to become more intelligent. And especially during adolescence, when all that activity is going on in the brain. Remember, I talked about synapses being formed and myelination happening and hooking up to the frontal lobe. During adolescence, it's incredibly important that we get kids thinking positively about taking challenges. And the way we do that is by giving them this sense of, oh, I increase my capacity to become more intelligent the more I take those challenges. And P.S., we can't just tell them that. We have to model that for them. Something I'll talk about in just a minute. They have to see us doing it too. Which is why, and the main reason I love talking about Carol Dweck is I was in my early 40s when I first read Mindset. And I had been told when I was in middle school that I just wasn't a math person, that I was a good writer and I was good in language and stuff like that, but math just wasn't my thing. I wasn't a math person, which, oh my gosh, we have to stop doing that. Stop saying it in front of your children. Stop talking about your math anxiety in front of your children, and fess up to the fact that it has a lot to do with the things people have told us about ourselves and what we've allowed us to believe about ourselves. And from reading Mindset, I suddenly got really upset with that middle school teacher who told me I just wasn't a math person. So what I did was I used my one prep period that I had in a year when I was teaching Latin and English and writing to 3 different grades. I took my one prep period and I retook Algebra 1 with my own kid, by the way, and my own students. And I found out I am a math person. I actually loved it. And it was a lot of work for me. I was exercising parts of my brain I hadn't had to work in a while. I was making all kinds of new connections. And it was humiliating because my mentally facile happens to, have a real knack for that math stuff. He's actually a math major in college now. He smoked me. It was humiliating. He would finish his homework. I would still be on problem 3, but he saw me struggle. And when I would finally get the answer to that problem, he was so proud of me, even if he had to explain it to me, even if he had been frustrated with me for being such an idiot that I couldn't get it the first time around. He was so proud of me for understanding it in the end. And now when I talk to him about the value of that struggle, he gets it on a very real level because he's seen me do it. Okay. So autonomy, competence, confidence based on actual experience. Competence is, that thing we need. Kids who can take something that they know really well, but then push just beyond so they can benefit from the desirable difficulties out the other side. Okay. Autonomy, competence, connection. As I said, for teachers, this is like a long talk. It's a fun talk though. For parents, it's really simple. It's just 2 things. Number 1, we have to love the kids we have and not just the kids we wish we had. And I know that's just devastating because I think I would never in a million years do that. But one of the things that I do when I go and I speak to schools, and I've, gotten to speak to many tens of thousands of kids, I ask them a couple of questions. But one of the things I do specifically at the end of my talk is I give them all my email address, and then I ask them to email me with things that they want me to make sure to tell their parents that evening. What do they want their parents to know? I get the coolest emails. Seriously, I love these emails. And the number one thing kids email me with that they want their parents to know is this, some version of this. I am not my brother. I am not my sister. I'm not you when you were my age. I am not your do-over. Which means that somehow kids are getting the message that we love them. They know we love them, but they also know that we really love some imaginary version of them that we have cooked up that's like their brother, like their sister, all of the things that we wanted to be that we weren't. And They know that. And kids know it when we don't truly see them. They know it when we don't truly know them and hear them. And more than anything else, that's what kids want to know, want to be, is heard and seen and known for them, not for some imaginary version of them. So love the kids you have, not the kids you wish you had. And number two, we can't just love them based on their performance. And I know I would never do that, except I do it all the time. We do it all the time because we tell them that we love them no matter what. We tell them that what we care about is that they're continuing to learn. And okay, yeah, they got a terrible grade, but we just care that they're continuing to learn. But here's what happens. See if this sounds familiar. Kids come home from school and they show us an A and we're all excited and we put it on the refrigerator. We call grandma and we FaceTime with all the relatives and we put it on Facebook. And then we come home with a low grade and we're silent. Well, the way kids hear that is that we love them more when we bring them the high grades and less when we give them low grades. And I ask kids about this specifically when I talk to them. I ask them to raise their hand. I make everyone close their eyes, by the way, so they're not embarrassed. I ask the kids to think really carefully about this question and to raise their hand if they truly believe that their parents love them more when they get high grades and less when they get low grades. And in middle school, around 75 to 80% of the kids raise their hand. It's gone down a tiny bit, actually. It used to be 80 to 85% in my experience. And in high school, it's around 85 to 90%. And that doesn't surprise me because that reflects research that has been done by Harvard's Making Caring Common project. And I don't have time to go into that, but it's on their website. They did a survey on kids about whether their parents cared more that they were nice, kind, caring people versus whether they got good grades. And the kids overwhelmingly chose the high grades and said their parents would overwhelmingly choose the high grades over being good and kind and caring. So we do that to kids. So how do we help kids? What do we do? What do you do? How do you walk away from today with a takeaway? There's really simple answer to how we help our kids be more autonomous, how we help them feel more autonomous, how we help them feel more competent, and how we help them feel more connected. And that's this. We have to focus more on the process of learning than on the end product of the learning. And partly that's so important because it helps them believe us when we say that what we care about is the learning and that we don't love them any more or less when they bring home a high grade versus a low grade, because this is all a process of learning. But it also keeps us really connected with our kids on an emotional level. And the research on emotion and learning is really, really clear. When kids are emotionally connected to the people who are teaching them and the things they're learning, they learn more. So if we want our kids to want to learn chemistry, if we want our kids to learn about sustainability, the environment, if we want our kids to learn math, if we want our kids to learn about writing, somehow we as parents and we as teachers have to find that emotional hook to hook our kids in. That's going to boost the chances that our kids going to want to learn for the sake of the learning. It's going to boost the chances that our kids are going to be in it for the sake of the learning and not just for whatever that grade is. And by the way, focusing more on the process and less on the product is especially beneficial for kids who are perfectionist, highly anxious kids, and kids with learning differences, because we're able to focus on that day-to-day, moment-to-moment process and not the better than, the less than, the A, the F, the most likely to succeed, the trophy. It's about that process. Because my book is called The Gift of Failure, not because I want kids to fail, but because I want kids to have what we call a positive, adaptive response to failure. I want kids to look at that failure, to own it, to see it, to know that they're not loved less because of it, that their job is to take what they've learned, look at it and say, okay, that didn't work. I'm going to leave that behind. And I'm going to take this stuff that did work and bring it forward with me. And I have to shut myself down at this point because I could talk about this stuff forever. But what I want parents to remember is love the kid you have, not the kid you wish you have. Don't just love them based on their performance. And the way we do that is by focusing more on the process and less on the product. and we make sure they know that we are willing to do exactly what we're asking of them, which is to be intellectually and emotionally brave and try things that make us uncomfortable, because that is how we expand our brains, how we become more competent, how we become more intelligent, and how we increase our capacity to become more intelligent. And it's the way we keep them engaged through something like COVID, when suddenly things just don't seem to matter as much. And right now it's overwhelming. And if we want kids to understand that what we do with our water and with our recycling and with the way we treat the earth, why that still matters, even if we're closed in this tiny little bubble, is by engaging them emotionally in the process. And engaging kids emotionally in the process means that we make it relevant to them. How is it relevant to you? And for me and my kid, I remember I said, I was talking to him about the fact that I really wish that we could be there with you today because we love visiting so much. The first time I was there with my younger son, he said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe how green and beautiful this place is." And I said, "Well, they've had an unusually wet year, but you should know that this area of the world is a place where we're having a lot of scarcity with the water, and it's not sustainable. And so take a look at what you're seeing, because what you're seeing is something that could go away forever." And that is a lesson that is going to stick for him. That's a lesson that has emotional resonance. And that's something that we have come back to over and over again, because the next time we visited and we went to see a friend of ours, the reservoir near her house was really low and you could see the stages. And we were able to go back to that time that it was so verdant and green. And that lesson he remembered and he had a real connection to, because emotion is what feeds learning. And our emotional connection with our kids is what feeds our relationship, which is what feeds back into their intrinsic motivation to learn. And I hope that if you take nothing else from today, you take that this idea of helping kids be more resilient really comes down to their engagement and their learning. And that comes from us. That comes from us prioritizing learning and loving them and really engaging in that connection. And again, I apologize that I can't go into tons of detail, but Gift of Failure is a book that is, yes, it gives the broad strokes, but I mean, I get really specific. I give you scripts. I give you instructions. I'm highly directive if you want to use the language of what I was talking about today. So you can always reach me through the comments section at jessicaleahy.com to ask me questions. There's all kinds of really cool resources there. If you sign up at jessicaleahy.com, you'll get an auto reply email with links to everything under the sun, my favorite YouTube educators, my favorite educators on YouTube that make learning relevant for kids. There's all kinds of cool resources there. So I hope this has been really helpful. I hope if you have any questions, you get in touch, because I love talking about this stuff. So thank you so much for being a part of things today. And if anyone has any questions, now is a great time to dump them in the comment section, because I think we have a few minutes left. How are we doing, Ricky? We have time? I hope we do.
Yes, absolutely. So the first question is from Marta. She's asked, how do we change the child to be autonomous?
Yeah, so if we have, now that we do have a little time to get a little bit micro about this, autonomy really, like I mentioned, it comes out of giving kids more control. And so if you have been overparenting your kid, if you've been doing a little too much for your kid, one of the things you can do, and it works great, and it's modeling the very behavior we want to see from them, is, "Sweetie, you know what? I think I've been doing too much for you. I think I've been having to nag you. I think I've been having to remind you too much. I've been helping you too much with your homework. I've been tying your shoes for you. You can tie your own shoes. I am so sorry that I've been underestimating you, but I learned some stuff and I want to do better." So if we give our kids really clear expectations, like a really great place to start is by saying, "You know what? I'm not going to sit on top of you and do your homework anymore. That's your job. Your job as a student is to be in charge of your homework." So to that end, here are my really clear expectations about homework. And I go into all this in the book. And here are the really clear consequences for what's going to happen if you don't get it done, or if you don't hand it in, or if you don't hand it in on time. And consequences really should be natural consequences. And natural consequences for not handing homework in should be having to have a meeting with the teacher to talk about how the parent and the teacher can support you to become more autonomous and to have more, to be more responsible, to be, have a strategy in place so that you can get that done. So when we go to kids and we say, sweetie, I think I've mucked this up a little bit, but I'm trying to do better. And I learned these things and I want to do better because I think you're more competent than I've been giving you credit for. Suddenly the kid looks at us and they're like, wait a second. Mom and dad are admitting that they do stuff wrong and they're learning from it too. So really clear expectations, really clear consequences, and follow through with that those consequences. I know that part stinks the most. I hate it too. But that is actually really, really important. So again, in Gift of Failure, there are really clear steps for how to do these things. And it changes a little bit depending on how old your kid is. Older kids, you can go into the rationale behind it a little bit more. With little kids, it may be as simple as, you know what, sweetie, I think you can put your dishes in the dishwasher. Of course you can do that. I'm sorry for underestimating you. Let's see you do it. And that can go a long way to letting the kid feel like you have a lot of faith in them. That's the key to giving kids more autonomy.
Thank you. And I actually have a question.
Of course.
As an environmental educator, I guess you can consider myself. I'm in classrooms giving presentations about, conserving water and climate change and topics that are starting to become not just hot topics, but very hotly contested. And so you also have students that are already really passionate about this kind of stuff because they're seeking this information out on their own. Right. And a lot of the times what I encounter with these students is a good amount of kind of existential dread because they're taking on this problem that they didn't cause, that all of a sudden everyone is saying is up to them to fix. So, looking at these issues impacting our planet, how can we work in, that resiliency to students as it relates to kind of that environmental existential dread?
That is a fantastic question. And there are a couple of things folded into your question that are so cool, because the fact that kids are going out there to seek more information, that is intrinsic motivation. That's exactly what I was talking about. Anytime a kid is like, ooh, that's cool, I want to learn more, they're in it because they're interested in the learning, and that's golden. And you want to protect and promote that and support that as much as possible. Even if it's not something you're interested in, even if you could care less about the environment, your kid cares. So you better care, because if you don't, the message they get is that you don't find your kid that interesting either, and that's how they hear it. So the way to help kids defeat that existential dread, which a lot of it comes down to that thing I already mentioned, which is called learned helplessness, which is, I can't do anything, it's such a big problem, really there's nothing I can do, I'm going to throw my hands up in the air and go helpless. The antidote to that is helping kids see the places they can make a difference, no matter how small, and helping them feel this thing called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the antidote to learned helplessness. And self-efficacy is for kids who, a lot of kids lack it because they haven't been given a lot of control, and a lot of kids don't have it because just for clarity, I spent the last 5 years of my teaching career teaching kids in a drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents. And so I taught a lot of kids who came from situations like being, shuttled around with foster care through group homes. They had trauma at home that they couldn't change on their own. Those kids tend to go into this place where they say, there's nothing I can do to change it, and to change my surroundings. The way we give kids a sense of self-efficacy is by helping them find small ways that they can change their world and the world around them, helping them feel more connected to the problem, and then showing them, look, by cleaning up this strip of our road, look, now animals aren't going to choke on this plastic, or by not as I sit here, my house smells really bad because our septic pump went out. And so for the next 24 hours, we can't really use water because we don't want to risk septic flooding all over. So I was having a conversation this morning with the added benefits of not using as much water today. And we decided to see just how little water we could use today, and then having a conversation about the aftermath of that, the consequences of that, what that will mean in terms of water supply later. There are very real places, especially where you are, because it's so visible when the water level is low. you can show kids exactly what their actions do in their immediate environment. So any experiments, any lessons you can give that show kids right there in front of them the impact their actions can have will increase their feelings of self-efficacy and decrease their feelings of existential dread and learned helplessness. So thank you. That's a fantastic question. And that's relevant. That works for just about anything. The more you help a kid see how it affects them personally, the more emotionally tied they're going to be to the lesson, and the more invested they will be in that lesson, and the more likely they will be to have that intrinsic motivation to find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely found that just in the times that I've spent in classrooms. And so
Yeah.
looking at these kind of big issues that we're discussing, even, adding social and economic inequality and environmental destruction, climate change, water, things that we've discussed, how will these impact current and future curriculum development as they're tasked with solving these issues?
Yeah, the wonderful thing about what's happening, one of the things that's happening in education increasingly, especially over the past 30 years or so, is we're starting to not have these silos of subjects like math is here and it has nothing to do with English, which has nothing to do with French, that kind of thing. What we're seeing now is a lot of overflow between curriculums. So for example, at my kids' high school, they have a class that is a combination of sort of history and sociology and civics and English, so that it all bleeds together. And in the school where I used to teach when I was a Latin teacher, obviously there was a lot of overflow between art and history. So I think what is going to really happen is when you take these issues, environmental issues, we are able you can take Rachel Carson's work and you can talk about it from a historical, from a literature, from a science perspective, that a text like hers is very much cross-curricular. And the more engaged we can create in education, we talk about creating hooks. Learning is like a big web, and the more hooks you can place on, I know I'm mixing metaphors here, but the more hooks you can create for a kid so that they can hang the knowledge on those hooks, the better. And the best way to do that is by making lessons cross-curricular. So if you're talking about water conservation, then history needs to be in there. Here's some literature where here's a dystopian novel where there is no water, and water, is the most precious. There's that Mad Max sort of. You can take Mad Max and you could take history, and you can take all these things together and talk about why is Mad Max an enduring film? Well, because that is a very real fear and a very real possibility for humankind. And so it taps into a very emotional place in our psyche. And so the more we do that for kids, the more we help them see how these things are relevant to them and relevant across subjects. Because while I may not want to go to math class 24 hours a day, and I happen to be over here in the humanities more, the more those things are interconnected, the more I'm going to see how learning about math is actually going to be relevant to whatever it is I'm learning over here. It's all about not making silos and integrating curriculum.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, and that's sort of a testament to why we wanted to host this webinar. I mean, when you're talking about education, whether it's sustainable education or anything else students are learning in school, now and moving forward, it really has to be a more holistic approach.
Absolutely.
To the content, you know what I mean? Because it doesn't just come down to water conservation. It comes down to sustainability and climate justice. And, to what you were speaking about, what are the ways that we can effectively communicate this to students in a way that they will take it on themselves as far as personal responsibility and make it something that's more relatable. So
and it's the way we it's the way we create a whole new generation of experts. And that's not by teaching by siloing a second grader into science and saying, here, go be a scientist. It's by taking kids that may not have even occurred to them. Like my son went to college to study history, and through a history class discovered economics. And so now he's a math and econ major. And that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been that crossover between subjects. So I think that's going to be incredibly important going forward. And by the way, someone asked very specifically in the comments just before we leave about traditional grading versus focused student evaluation. I've written about this extensively. I wrote about it. There's an article in The Atlantic called Why Letter Grades Deserve an F that will fully explain this moving from traditional grading to a more process-focused or mastery-focused assessment program for kids. So if I'd had time to go into it, I would have recapped that article. So Why Letter Grades Deserve an F by Jessica Leahy in The Atlantic.
Awesome. And I'll put your website in the chat one more time for those of you that are interested. Let me make sure I spelled it right.
And all these articles I'm referring to, including the one I just mentioned, is in the bibliography. So if you go to jessicaleahy.com and sign up for my newsletter, you'll get immediate email with the bibliography and all kinds of links to all kinds of articles, including the ones I just talked about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It looks like we've covered
so welcome.
the chat. Jessica, thank you so much. You brought some invaluable insight to our webinar, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Ricky, for what you do. I would love to be there and be able to tour and do all that stuff. But I'm stuck here in Vermont. So
yes, and that's okay, because that's why we're offering, what's coming up next, which is our virtual tour. So you mentioned, how do you kind of connect the issues with students? Well, that's definitely that's definitely a challenge that we face as water professionals, and something that we're facing with these virtual tours.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you so much, Jessica. Moving along, we're going to go ahead and get started with a virtual tour of our Pure Water Project, Las Virginis Triumphal. Let me spotlight myself real quickly. All right, folks. So kind of switching gears a tiny bit, we're going to go ahead and get started with our virtual tour. First, though, I want to play a video for you all that kind of gives you some really interesting visual as well as audio looks at basically why we wanted to go with this reuse project. So I mentioned earlier that our Pure Water Project is an indirect potable reuse project that essentially takes previously treated water that we treat up at our Tapia wastewater facility, highly treated recycled water, sends it through the advanced treatment process here, and turns it back into drinking water. So this is a process that's been used in our region for decades now. This is technology that's used in the space station in space, as well as several other countries around the world. And we're using it here to basically create our own localized source of water, which is going to be absolutely critical to our region as far as sustainability and water reliability now and moving along to the future. So again, you guys are going to hear me talk plenty throughout the tour. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can take a look at the video.
For billions of years, the same water has been cycling around the Earth. From this perspective, it is hard to imagine that there can be any kind of water shortage on this beautiful blue planet. Yet almost 97% of this water is salt water. Of the 3% that is fresh water, most of that is locked away in glaciers and icebergs. That leaves just 1% of the planet's water that is accessible and available to meet the needs of an exploding human population. This 1% must quench the thirst of 7.5 billion people today and nearly 10 billion by 2050. And it is not just water for human consumption. From generating power to making automobiles to all of the food we eat, water is involved in the creation of almost everything we enjoy. This is the hidden use of water, the water we don't see, that makes our modern life possible. As water passes through our cities and towns, farms and factories, and over natural rock formations, it picks up a host of contaminants that affect its quality. In addition, because water is not evenly distributed around the world, droughts and floods add additional pressure to water-stressed communities. Within the communities served by the Las Virginis Triumphal Joint Powers Authority, there is no local supply of drinking water that can meet our needs. This means that all of the drinking water for both our districts must be imported, mostly from Northern California through the State Water Project, and this water has its origins in the snow-covered Sierra Nevada mountains. In this system, the water travels over 400 miles, passing through numerous rivers, reservoirs, power stations, and pumping plants, which must lift the water over mountains as high as 2,000 feet. While this water has great value to our community, there is a significant cost and use of energy to transport it from the far north to our region. In addition, drought, a strained delta ecosystem, impacts from a changing climate, potential damage caused by earthquakes, and competition among water users means that we cannot count on a consistent supply from the State Water Project. One of the ways in which we deal with these variations in supply at Las Virginis is by storing imported water in Las Virginis Reservoir. It is good to think of the reservoir as our water savings account, which can hold enough water to meet our needs for 6 months in an emergency. During the summer, we draw water from the reservoir and treat it at the Westlake Filtration Plant, which can process up to 18 million gallons per day. Too often, we think the amazing journey of water ends at our homes and businesses, where we use it for cooking, cleaning, gardening, and more. Once we flush it down the drain, we don't think of it anymore as something that has value. In fact, our homes and businesses are only the halfway point in our local water cycle. The Joint Powers Authority's Tapia Water Reclamation Facility is the next stop in this cycle. This is where our used water gets cleaned and recycled so we can use it again. This recycled water provides great value to Malibu Creek by supporting endangered fish during the summer months when the creek has very low natural flows. Most of Tapia's water is returned to the community via our Purple Pipe network, where it is used in irrigating our parks, golf courses, and greenbelts that add value to our region. In the wintertime, however, when demand is not as high, much of the recycled water is released into Malibu Creek and eventually ends up in Santa Monica Bay. This precious water, in which we have invested so much to transport and clean, is basically wasted. But does it have to be this way? If we thought of this water as a valuable resource instead of a waste, we open up a whole new world of possibilities. While the water from Tapia has always met EPA standards, new government regulations are now requiring us to clean the water to levels higher than drinking water standards before sending it into Malibu Creek. With this new reality, it is time to rethink releasing this water downstream and losing it to the Pacific Ocean. We now have an opportunity to get even more value out of our local water. Our Pure Water project will add additional treatment processes on top of what happens at Tapia so that this water is ready for potable reuse, which means we can drink it. The 3 new treatment processes, microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and ultraviolet disinfection, have been used for years in places like Orange County to help replenish their groundwater systems and mimic what nature has done for billions of years. In fact, communities around the world in countries like Australia, Belgium, and Singapore have developed similar systems to help recycle their own water. This is extremely safe technology and has provided hundreds of billions of gallons of water to these communities over the last 10 years. In our case, we will send the highly purified water back to our water savings account at Las Virginis Reservoir. Here, it will meet California's strict regulations for dilution standards and holding times. Having come full circle, the water will blend with water in the reservoir and pass through the normal drinking water treatment processes at the Westlake Filtration plant. It will then be ready to be used again and again in our communities. Eventually, the Pure Water Project will provide up to 15% of our water supply. The benefits of this will be immense to our region and beyond. First, that will be 15% less water that we have to import from Northern California. Financially and environmentally, there will be great savings in the cost and energy that was needed to transport that water over such a great distance. It also creates our own local, sustainable supply of water that provides stability as our communities grow and prosper. The Pure Water Project is just another example of the Las Virginis Triumphal Joint Powers Authority's leadership in innovation and sustainability. In working to close the sustainability loop, for years we have been using recycled water for our parks, golf courses, and green belts, as well as reclaiming biosolids and converting them to a nutrient-rich soil amendment. In addition, we have an expanding solar farm that is providing huge savings in electrical costs while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As we do our part in saving precious natural resources, we ask that you do your part in protecting and conserving the most precious of them all, water. Things like collecting the water in the shower while waiting for hot water, turning off the tap while brushing your teeth, and landscaping with drought-resistant plants and drip irrigation systems can save thousands of gallons of water each year. By bringing water full circle and using it over and over again, we are helping to sustain global water supplies by getting the most value possible out of every precious drop we use and reuse again and again.
As a way to tell the story of why we decided to go with the Pure Water Project and really its importance to our region, both now and in the future. So now that you all have a little bit of a background as to the history and the inception of the project, why don't we go ahead and take a look at our demo facility. So right now I'm standing with a GoPro strapped to my head to give you guys a first-person tour of our Pure Water Project demonstration facility. So as I move inside, I just do want to highlight that this is the demo facility. And essentially this gives us about 10 years to get familiar with the process and the technology involved in the advanced purification process, which turns recycled water back into drinking water. This also gives us an opportunity to educate the public and really garner that trust and public buy-in in what we're doing here with the JPA. So just getting started, I'm going to head over to my left and give you all a nice view at the first thing you see when you come and see this in person, right? So this is a mural that we commissioned a local Ventura artist by the name of M.B. Hanrahan to basically erect that tells the story of water within our region, right? So we wanted something that was very vibrant and something that stands out and can draw people in from outside when we're allowed to have them again. So I just want to give you kind of a once-over view at everything here. Essentially, it follows the flow of water through our watershed, right? So first you see it being used in the natural environment. You see it serving the flora and the fauna here. You take a look at Puma, our resident Puma P54. This is actually a puma that we've spotted a few times up at our wastewater facility at Tapia. So she included that in the mural. And as you move along, you basically see the water move from the natural environment into human use, right? So in this human silhouette, you see industrial use, you see how we use water to fight fires, for manufacturing, for fishing, things of that sort. As you move further along the mural, You see the silhouette of a tree, and inside of it, you see very agricultural items. Obviously, California is huge on agriculture. For those of you that don't know, we are the 5th largest economy in the entire world, specifically for our agriculture. We quite literally feed the entire world. And the most important thing to agriculture, of course, is water. So finally, as you come over further along into human use, you see the silhouette of a baby and sort of all the personal uses or ways we use water within that. So brushing our teeth, showering, cooking. Really with this mural, it shows just how important and key and critical water is to our lives. And finally, as we come to the very end, if you look up top a little bit, you can see the water going through the advanced purification process here, where it comes out of the faucet and culminates in our pure water product. So again, we wanted to tell our story in a nice, vibrant, and visual way. As we move into the facility, you'll notice a couple things, right? You'll notice the dropped ceiling, the overhead lights highlighting the technology. We really wanted to convey with this facility that this is our big project and that it's going to create a reliable water source, drinking water source for our customers. So we really wanted to convey that this is something that's trustable and that's very clean and reliable and, of course, aesthetically pleasing. So before we get into the actual technology that makes up the advanced water process, why don't we take a quick look at the water cycle? So we wanted to include this for a very specific reason. First, to my left, you see the natural water cycle. We're all very familiar with this. We've learned about it in school. We benefit from it every single day. We know how it goes. Water forms in clouds. It rains. It flows into the ground where it stays above ground for human use. It's treated, and then eventually, like all water, it ends up back into the ocean where it evaporates, and then it restarts the cycle all over again. What we wanted to show with this graphic is how we're using this technology behind me to essentially mimic that process and use it to our benefit so that we can create this pure water that we need quicker, right? Because although this process is very reliable and it's proven, this is what we've lived on for years, we now have over 7 billion people on this planet that we have to make sure we have enough water for. So now we're using this technology to kind of speed that process up in what we call the pure water cycle. So now with the pure water cycle, I'll pan in a little bit, you essentially begin where we buy our water from, which is the Metropolitan Water District. That water is piped to our reservoir, and then it's treated at our Westlake Filtration plant. After that, you can see it being piped to homes where it's used for various different residential uses. And after that, it ends up at our Tapia water reclamation facility or our sewage facility where it's treated. As of right now, this is essentially where our water journey ends. It gets turned into recycled water, and then it's either ejected into Malibu Creek where it ends up in the ocean, or we use it for irrigation. Once this pure water process is put into play, we'll now take that recycled water created at Tapia, send it over to the advanced purification facility where it'll undergo this process behind me and be turned back into drinking water. And of course, the main sort of byproduct from that process is brine, which is a salt product. We'll have an additional pipeline that sends that brine over to the ocean so that we're making sure we're taking care of that byproduct. But again, I just wanted to kind of highlight this graphic to show you exactly that what we're doing is not new. We're essentially taking technology made available to us that's proven, and we're mimicking what already happens in nature. So now that you kind of take a look at what we're doing, I guess you can say graphic-wise, let's take a look at the technology itself. What we're going to be doing is talking about each process and showing you what it looks like here at the demonstration facility, beginning with ultrafiltration. All right, so I have Mike McNutt, our public affairs manager, and he's going to be kind of chatting with me and going over each of the processes and what happens at each process. So the first one is ultrafiltration, and this is essentially when water is pushed through membranes in order for the larger bacteria and protozoa to be filtered out. So I'm going to kind of pan in so you can see the technology up close and personal. And just before we get started talking about the exact process, these are each membrane that's involved in the treatment process. And you might see that each of these membranes is kind of a different size and even a different color. As I mentioned earlier, this is a demonstration facility, and we're all still learning about this technology, and we're still learning about what works best for us. So when we have the full-scale facility up and running in about 10 years, by then we will have made a decision on which membrane works best for us at this point. So getting started, again, this is Mike McNutt, and he's going to kind of talk to us a little bit about the first step of the process.
Hi, Nikki. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I know we're running so low on time, and I know for a lot of you, you've learned kind of some of the nuances associated with what you're seeing behind us here from the video. So I won't go into too much detail. We'll talk just a little bit about what we're looking at here. So as Ricky just talked about, these three tubes have very small filaments in it. And over here in this tank that you see here is where the recycled water comes into our facility, and then it's put through these micro filters that you see here. Now inside of it, there's these little pieces of plastic. And each hole inside the plastic is about 1/100th the size of a human hair. So they're super small. And the water is pressurized through them. And because those holes are so small, it actually keeps out and filters out things like protozoa, stuff that's floating in the water, and some bacteria. And water scientists and engineers use this term log. The reason why this is important is because logs determine the efficiency of how much is filtered out. And so right here, what you're seeing through this first microfiltration process, what you're seeing is a 2 to 3 log removal rate. So it's somewhere between like a 99.9 and a 99.99% removal rate. And let me say this, 1 log is a 99% removal rate, 2 logs is 99.9, 3 is 99.99. So each time you go up, it adds another 9 onto it. So this process takes somewhere between a minute for the water to go through here, and every 28 minutes, these are backwashed to clean them with pressurized air to shake off any of the debris that's left. So this is the first process when it comes to pure water. Let's move over here to reverse osmosis. Now, it may not look like a lot of stuff right here, and I don't know if you want to go behind here, Ricky, and show them what the tubes look like. But the second phase in this is called reverse osmosis. And again, this is going to be pressurized water. Once it goes through the microfiltration process, it goes through these different tubes that you can see behind this the unit here. And the water is pressurized to the point where it flows back and forth through these different tubes. And in our case, through this demonstration project, it's a 3-stage reverse osmosis process. This is so effective at removing further water quality impediments, things like bacteria and viruses that may have gotten through the first microfiltration process. And at the end of this, it's actually a 4 log removal. So it's highly effective at removing water quality impediments. As we move down here to the last process, which is ultraviolet and light and advanced oxidation removal, this process here, if anything at all would have gotten through those first 2 processes, what this is going to do is highly chlorinate the water, and then the chlorine is then removed. But more importantly, it's actually shooting basically like sunlight in a very highly intensive way into this chamber here. And what happens there is if there's any bacteria or viruses or anything left in the water, that ultraviolet light will break it down to the DNA, where there's not going to have any residual byproduct or any residual water quality impairment at all. So what you get at the end of all of these 3 processes is quite literally the H2O molecule. So pure water, that's what we're talking about. As Ricky alluded to, the natural water cycle, the pure water cycle are very mirrored with each other. But what's really crazy is that the water is so pure that we actually have to add minerals back into it. If you would consume pure water over a long period of time, the water would want to react by pulling different types of minerals from your body in order for it to, satisfy its need to have things attached to it. Water is kind of aggressive, and that's why we add minerals to it to help stabilize it so it's not going to do something to harm us. It's very similar to drinking distilled water on a regular basis. So at the end of all this, what you get is pure water. And what we're going to do is take that water and we're going to send it up to our reservoir. It'll have a residence time in the reservoir to mix with environmental factors. And therefore, once that's happened, we'll put it through our Westlake water treatment plant, and we put it back into our distribution system. So this is a very, very quick rundown of everything you're seeing in these 3 different processes to make pure water.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for that overview of the treatment process. Now I'm going to take you all over to our demonstration kitchen. So this is essentially what we wanted to include here at our facility because, again, this is also used for outreach. And we essentially wanted to kind of show customers how their water is going to end up in their own homes, right? So we obviously have a kitchen set up. We have a nice large sink as well as sort of like a window. It's really a TV screen, but a window that kind of gives you nice views as you are actually inside of a home. And so something I would like to note for you guys before we wrapped up, I've said it many times, Mike mentioned it as well, this is our Pure Water Project demonstration facility. So in addition to being an outreach tool and a way that we educate the public, this is also the main way that we're training and educating our operators to make sure that they are more than familiar and nice and intimate with the process before we go full scale in 2030. So a part of that obviously is dealing with the challenges that come along with the process and figuring out how to resolve them. So if you sort of zoom in here, or if I pan in here, you'll notice a clear PVC pipe. Usually that has water coming out of it, and that would be kind of the effluent from this process or the final product. There's no water in that pipe right now because the facility is currently offline as we've encountered some challenges with the RO filters. So we don't have any water producing right now. However, this is sort of just a part of the process, and this is really how we're figuring out how to work with this process and make sure that we're completely solid with it by the time we go full scale in 2030. So we will be making these virtual tours available to the public very shortly. The facility basically just finished wrapping up, and we held a sort of a virtual grand opening back in September. And so right now we're essentially just kind of wrapping up some of the other challenges we face with the process, and we'll soon be able to offer these tours much more in depth to our customers and to anyone that's interested in the very near future. So if you all are interested, you can visit the website, ourpureh2o.com, and you'll be able to make reservations to get a better up close view of the tour. And then moving forward, I know we're kind of in the thick of the pandemic right now and cases are skyrocketing. However, once things start quieting down and COVID regulations allow in the future, we will be offering tastings of the water where you can actually taste that pure water product safely, as well as garden walks where you'll be able to see the beautiful sustainability garden that surrounds our pure water demonstration facility and all of the water saving features that are included. So rain barrels, rain gardens, different plants that are great for your garden that don't take as much water as grass or your lawn. So make sure you stay tuned for that. We'll be offering those when we are able to, when COVID sort of subsides. Until then, we hope that you've enjoyed this tour and this webinar. I'm going to check the chat to see if we have any questions. And see if I can switch my camera so I can say bye to everyone. Awesome. So this is what I've looked like walking around, giving you guys a tour. I have my phone in one hand so that I can see and make sure that my view is great. I have the transmitter in another. I have my mask on for safety, and I have my camera strapped to my head, giving you guys a nice first-person look at our facility. Again, we'll be offering these virtual tours to the public very soon. I hope that you guys have enjoyed what you've learned at session 1 and session 2 of Tap In Sustainable Education. And we hope that you are interested in the way that we are doing our part in promoting sustainable education to the public. I'll check the chat one more time to make sure we don't have any questions. We have some thank yous. Thank you all for coming. I hope that it was useful information for you. And I'll be giving these tours probably for the rest of my life, so you'll be able to hear me talk some more. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Bye.